Good day everyone. My name is Maria Micaela from Group 2. Our topic is all about motherboard parts identification and color code of the PSU. So before I start, let me discuss our discussion and conclusion. In discussion, we discuss what is motherboard and identifying the parts of the motherboard, and also discuss the function and meaning of the motherboard parts, and discuss the value or meaning of the following color codes of the PSU. For our conclusion is to understand the meaning and function of the motherboard, to know the different parts of the motherboard. These are the color codes used in PC power supply cable, and within the information, you can easily identify which cable to connect appropriately and to know the specification of each color code in PSU. So before we proceed, is there someone here who can identify what is motherboard?
In my opinion, motherboard is the largest printed circuit board in a machine chassis.
Okay, that's it. Thank you for your answer. So now, let's move on in our main topic. So what is motherboard? A motherboard is the main printed circuit board or PCB in a computer. The motherboard is a computer-centered communications backbone connectivity point through which all components and external peripherals connect. And the function of the motherboard is it distributes electricity and facilitates communication between and to the central processing unit or CPU, random access memory or RAM, and any other component of the computer's hardware. Can anyone give me some types of the motherboard?
The parts of the motherboard: south bridge, north bridge, memory slot, and jumpers.
Okay, thank you for your answer. So we have memory slot. A memory slot is responsible for temporarily storing data in a computer's RAM or random access memory, a type of volatile memory that allows the system to access data quickly. The computer uses the RAM to store data currently used by the system and application. Next is we have CPU slot. A CPU slot is used to connect a microprocessor with a printed circuit board or PCB without soldering, allowing for the CPU to be installed or replaced more easily on the motherboard. Also, CPU slot is commonly found in PCs, and server CPU sockets are the antithesis of the surface amount CPUs use in laptops, which conserve space at the expense of convenient installation or swapping. Next is we have PCI slot. A PCI slot is built-in slot on a device that allows for the attachment of various hardware components such as network cards, modems, sound card, disk controllers, and other peripherals. PCI slot also was often a component of traditional do-it-yourself or DIY desktop computer design. Next is ROM, read-only memory, a non-volatile memory type. This means it receives data and permanently writes it on a chip, and it lasts even after you turn off your computer. And also, the data of the ROM is coded to not be overwritten, so it's used for things like your printer software of your startup programs. In our next slide, we have North Bridge and South Bridge. North Bridge is bridge that manage communication between central processing unit, CPU, and parts of the motherboard. North Bridge is also after CPU. North Bridge chip is essentially main component of motherboard and is only motherboard circuit besides CPU that normally runs out full processor bus speed front side bus. And next is South Bridge. South Bridge controls lower speed buses like PCI times 64 or 32 times. It also contains Ethernet, USB, and audio devices. South Bridge is another chip of the logical chipset architecture. It is located to the south of peripheral component interconnect PCI bus in the motherboard. So next slide, we have CMOS battery. The CMOS battery, complementary metal oxide semiconductor battery, also called coin cell battery on the motherboard. It helps the BIOS or UEFI to store the hardware and configuration settings. It helps keep a record of the date and time when the computer is switched off. Also, you can tell if your CMOS battery has died, if your laptop has difficult booting up, if the drivers disappear, and if your laptop's date and time are incorrect. Next is ATX 24-pin connector. It supplies power to the CPU, memory, chipset, and other onboard devices. It has 24 pins arranged in two rows of 12. Some older motherboard may have 20-pin connector instead, in which case you can use an adapter or a PSU that has a 20 plus 4-pin connector that can split into two parts. Next, we have SATA port. SATA port is a Serial Advanced Technology Attachment, also known as Serial ATA or SATA. Enables mass storage devices, such as hard drives and optical drives, to communicate with the motherboard using high-speed serial cable over two pairs and conductors. PATA port, short for Parallel ATA, is an IDE standard for connecting storage devices like hard drives and optical drives to the motherboard. Next, we have heatsink. The purpose of a heatsink is to properly remove the heat from the device's components to improve device performance and extend its life. And usually, a heatsink incorporates a fan or other mechanism to reduce the temperature of hardware components such as processor. Next, we have jumpers. A jumper is short length of conductor used to close, open, or bypass part of an electronic circuit. They are typically used to set up or configure printed circuit boards such as the motherboards of computer. Jumper also process of settings. A jumper is often called strapping. Next is optical drive audio connectors. Alternatively called the optical drive audio connector, the CD in a 4-pin connector found on a computer's motherboard or sound card that connects an optical drive's audio. CD in. Also, the picture shows a black 4-pin connector and an example of what this connector looks like a component of the motherboard. Next, we have VRM. VRM stands for Voltage Regulator Module, and fortunately, that is a pretty self-descriptive name. Every motherboard has a voltage regulator module placed near the CPU in order to regulate the voltage that passes from your PSU and its power cables to your CPU socket. The next slide, we have serial port. A serial port is a serial communication interface through which information transfer in or out sequentially one bit at a time. Serial port, this is in contrast to a parallel port, which communicates multiple but simultaneously in a parallel. 1394 header. The 1394 header and USB header is a pin connection found on the computer motherboard that allows additional 1394 and USB or Universal Serial Bus connection to be added to the computer. Power Supply Unit. Color codes of the PSU identification. Before we proceed in our next topic, can someone give me an example color codes of the PSU?
Yellow, orange, red, and black.
Okay, thank you for your answer. So the first color code is yellow. Yellow is commonly used for 12 volts DC connections. This wire provides the main power supply voltage for most components in a computer including the motherboard, CPU, and graphics card. Next is red. Red is usually associated with positive 5 volts DC connections. The, the positive 5 volts voltage rail powers various components such as USB ports, some motherboard components, and certain peripherals. Next, we have orange. Orange is commonly used for positive 3.3 volts DC connections. The positive 3.3 volts voltage rail supplies power to specific components such as memory modules or RAM or certain motherboard components. Next is black. Black wires are typically used for ground connection because black is a universally recognized color for grounding purpose in electrical wiring. It serves as visual indicator for users to identify and connect the ground wires correctly. Next, we have purple. Purple wires are often associated with positive 5-volt SB or standby connections. The positive 5 volts SB voltage rail provides a low power standby voltage even when the computer is turned off. Next is green. The green wire carries a low level, continuous signal from the power supply to the motherboard, indicating that the power supply is functioning correctly and within the specified parameters. Next, we have gray. Gray is the signal lets you or your circuit know that the power coming from the PSU is okay and running with the tolerance not under or over voltage. Next is white. The white wire is the neutral wire. It takes any unused electricity and current and sends it back to the breaker panel. The green wire, or it can sometimes be uncolored wire, is the ground wire. It will take electricity back to the breaker panel, then outside to a rod that's buried in the ground. Next is blue. Blue is used for 12-volt DC connections. The 12-volt voltage rail is relatively less used in modern computer systems but can be necessary for certain legacy devices or specialized hardware. And that's all. Thank you for listening and watching.